Hello, Cloud Gurus. I'm Mattias Andersson, developer advocate here at Pluralsight and a Cloud Guru, and I am here today with Andre Zoutte from AWS, who's graciously agreed to join us to talk about the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner exam. So we're going to be talking through some information about the exam, so going through some sample questions, some strategies for how you can overcome it. But before we get into any of that, I would love for you to introduce yourself, if you don't mind.
Thanks, Mattias. Yes, I'm Andre Zoutte, and I work for Amazon, AWS, and I work for the specific part of the company that creates and maintains the certification exams. So I'm really excited to be part of this program and help drive adoption and people taking our exams. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, we're happy to. So you may have noticed that we're wearing some fun hats. Andre came with these awesome hats with removable giraffes.
That giraffe's name has a special significance for us. This is a game that we have created called Cloud Quest, but the giraffe's name is Cloudera.
There we go. So we are on site at AWS reInvent. So if you can hear some stuff going on behind us, it's an open air, there's a trade show going on, there's a lot of stuff going on. So reInvent is because it's the setting, we were just talking a little bit earlier about reInvent. So
Mattias, I had a question for you. So when I try to explain what reInvent is to my relatives, they don't get it.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell them it's this giant party in Las Vegas with thousands and thousands of people, lots of new information being presented, all this stuff, and they say, Andre, you're an introvert. What are you doing at a giant party in Las Vegas? And I've got to explain, no, this one's a lot of fun. This is amazing. I'd never miss it. So how do you explain it to your relatives, what reInvent is?
Yeah, so I mean, there's so much about reInvent. I say that it's like the biggest tech meetup. It's super awesome, super full of tons of stuff going on. But we get to get together as a community of people who love AWS. There are sessions where we learn a lot of stuff. There are keynotes where we learn a lot of stuff. There are workshops and breakouts chalk talks and like all sorts of things, events, receptions. We're doing a ton of stuff and it's really awesome. And so it gets a little overwhelming, but it's also totally worth it. So you said, your family says, hey, you're an introvert. How can you go to this thing and how can that be what it is? Right. Well, I think a lot of us are feeling the same way, where we know that it's worth it to come here and sort of get into all of the connections with everyone, and then we'll recover after. So
yeah, this is kind of the week I come out of my shell.
Yeah.
And to me it's wonderful because I get to deal with actual customers. I get to talk to them about their journeys, what certification exams they're thinking of taking, what studying they might need to do for it, which are conversations that I truly love because I'm very passionate about what I do in working in the certification field, but I'm one step removed from the customers, and this is a chance for me to really connect with them.
Yeah, I agree. It's the same thing for me, that getting a chance to connect with all of our customers, the people who've taken our training and have wound up changing their careers and changing their lives because of it, it's so rewarding. So
yeah, it helped me pivot my career. I wouldn't be in anywhere near the same position if it wasn't for me, training up and learning and taking certification exams and going all in on AWS.
Yeah, a lot of people joining us are also in that sort of a situation. In fact, I see that there's a comment now from JJ, CCP exam next week, kind of nervous. That's okay. Some shout outs from the UK. Hello, Carlos, and there's also Baruch. A lot of people have joined us, and we're really glad that you have. So today we're going to jump into, like we said, the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner. But let's start a little bit as we jump into this with some of the frequently asked questions that people ask us. So we're going to start with a little bit of a high level, but we'll get to some questions in a little bit. But we'll start with, where does this certification fit in with other certifications? So I get that question a lot, and I have had a slightly different perspective on this answer than, say, AWS has intended, but I think that there's actually a lot of value to all of the different perspectives. So I'll just give you a little bit of a heads up on what my sort of perspective is on this, and I'd love for you to add yours as well.
You bet.
So the way that I see the certification is that it is a really valuable tool for you to learn what you need to understand to have that basic cloud fluency. You understand AWS so you can communicate with other people about it. You understand it so that you can start using it yourself. And you fill in a lot of those blind spots that you didn't necessarily know about. Now, some people say, "Oh, well, I'm more technical. I already use AWS more deeply." And I say, "Well, you know what? That's still not a reason not to take this Certified Cloud Practitioner as a first step, because either you will already know all the stuff and it'll be super fast when you go through it, or you won't necessarily have known all of the things and you'll fill in those little bits that would have caught you off guard down the road." So I think it's a really valuable stepping stool. And so, or stepping stone, I should say. So I've put together, me with help from a lot of the people on the Cloud Guru and Pluralsight team, the AWS Certification Guide, where we talk through a lot of how people can bring themselves to greater success using the certifications. And so I put the Cloud Practitioner at the start of all of the different tracks. The Cloud Practitioner and then the Solutions Architect Associate. Even if you're in other roles, I think that that's such a valuable way to go because it fills in those blind spots that you wouldn't necessarily have known about. Now that's not exactly what AWS recommends. Do you want to counterpoint there? That's all right.
I think the Cloud Practitioner is a fantastic exam, and there's lots of good reasons to take it. I think something you hit on is if you're going on a technical track, it is a stepping stone.
Yeah.
It's not your endpoint, it's a step to get to your endpoint. But there are another group of people that are only semi-technical or non-technical, maybe technical recruiters, maybe project managers. They might not need any more than this. They just need to speak the language. And so this one certification can actually fill in both of those needs for the technical side and the semi-technical side, which I think is great.
I totally agree with you. In fact, I would not at all discourage anyone from going to get the Cloud Practitioner because they didn't fit what I was describing of a more technical role, because you're absolutely right. And in fact, I strongly recommend that anyone working with technology in any way should have this kind of understanding.
Sure.
Faye Ellis and I were doing an interview with theCUBE yesterday, and this is one of the things that I also called out, is that even if the people in the organization are like in finance or sales or executive or whatever, if they don't have this kind of understanding that the Cloud Practitioner represents, they're going to be in a lot more trouble because they're not going to have the awareness of the important tools that actually significantly affect their business.
It's pretty important for them to understand that an S3 bucket is where you store objects, not a garden implement. So yes.
Yes, exactly. All right, so that is sort of the guide. We've got a link that's already gone out in the chat. That's good. I see someone is taking the exam next week and is excited. Nice. Way to go, Jeffrey. Yeah. All right, so let's take a look at what our next question that we often get is, so what are the exam details? Like what's going on here? And I would point you to the exam documentation page and the exam guide. Those are really the key place. So from the overview page, we see that we have 90 minutes to answer 65 questions, and they're multiple choice or multiple response. Multiple response means that it's still like you have defined choices, but you might need to choose 2 of the 5 to say what the correct answer is. It's not just one of the 5, and you don't get partial marks if you only answer one of them. You have to answer both if it's 2 out of 5.
That's correct.
And that's actually a good technique to make sure that people know the actual material. It's to reduce the sensitivity to random guessing. But the next thing is also the exam breakdown. Do you want to walk us through that?
Sure. So each of the exams, including Cloud Practitioner, is broken down into domains, and domains are main categories of focus within the exam. So for instance, there's 4 domains here, you see them listed. Each one also shows you a percentage amount. This is how many of the questions are going to be inside that domain. And then the domains themselves are broken down further into tasks. We don't assign percentages to them, but that gives you an idea of kind of where you should be focusing your study. Another important thing to understand about the exams, Mattias, is that especially at reInvent, people are wondering, okay, I just saw new content talked about in a keynote.
Yes.
Is that going to show up on this exam? And the answer is, no new content will show up on the exam unless it's been generally available for at least 6 months. After that, it still takes a while to percolate onto the exam, but be assured that any new things you see will not be on the exam unless it's been GA for at least 6 months. Which is another good reason that I recommend people study for the exam, register and take it without a long time between those. I hear about people that study for the exam and they wait a year and now they have to restudy. So, to me, it's a much more effective approach to study for and then take it rather than a big delay.
Just sort of lock it in, lock in your progress.
Right.
In fact, I think that really lines up with what I was talking about earlier as well, about it being a stepping stone. You actually want to step on the stone and then the next one, and not just see them in front of you, sort of a thing, right? So, yeah. All right. Well, the next thing we have to go through is to just give a little bit of context. What are the key services on the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner exam? Obviously, that's the one we're talking about this entire time. There's a lot of them. So we've listed a few of the key ones here, but to be honest, it's a very high level, thin layer of all of the different services so that you have an understanding of how they work in general. It's not like, are you an expert at these things? That's that fair to say?
High level is typically what we expect on Cloud Practitioner, yes.
Yeah.
So, understand essentially what it does and, how to differentiate it between other services. But yeah, you typically don't need to go into very great details.
Sounds good. All right, so the last thing before we jump into questions is a strategy for how you can break down exam questions. Now, this strategy is actually general. It doesn't only apply to the cloud practitioner. It doesn't only apply to these exams. A lot of people have said that they have found this a really super valuable technique for the professional exams that AWS offers, or specialties, also for the associates, and even still for the cloud practitioner. But I wanted you all to have this in your minds because it forces you to go through some steps that help prevent errors. Because a lot of people get tripped up on, okay, well, this is multiple choice question, and they wind up jumping to certain answers, and that's a bit of the trickiness. Because the distractors, what's the official description for a distractor?
So a distractor is a response that is not a key. So the key is the correct response, the distractors are all the incorrect responses.
Yeah, and in particular, they're supposed to be written so that somebody who doesn't have enough mastery of the material might think, well, that looks reasonable, or it doesn't necessarily key off of something that makes it wrong. And so that's what leads me to the strategy that I've got. So the first step when you look at a question is you want to understand it. So you understand all the key terms. You read the whole thing so that you see what's going on. If there are terms in that question that you don't understand, that's a problem for you to be able to answer it, because the whole point is that it's a context for demonstrating your ability. You want to look at the kicker, that last little bit in the question. So it says maybe some build-up or some scenario, and then how would you do this in a cost-effective way, or how would you fix their security problem, or whatever, that sort of a thing. That's the thing that you really need to answer. But then when you go to the response options, when you're looking at those ones, you should eliminate any ones that have wrong information in them. So if it says, how would you fix their security issue, and it says, make all of your S3 buckets publicly writable by default, or make them, I don't think you can do it by default, but make them all publicly writable, not gonna fix your security issues, so that one eliminate and move on to something else, right? You go through every response, and if you see something that you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, that's wrong information, usually the answers will actually be right for some other scenario, but sometimes they'll be just like completely not a correct thing, so eliminate. By the way, if you want to jump in at any point in time, you go ahead.
So, those are really good strategies. And, one thing I would mention as well is, no one knows everything. Mattias doesn't know everything. I don't know everything. So you are going to come across questions where you don't know the answer. And when you come across those, it's great to eliminate the ones you're sure are not it, and then just pick between the ones that are. Now, all questions you can flag for review later. So go ahead and flag it so that you might come back to it if you have plenty of time. And then don't beat yourself up if you don't know the answer. Be ready to just move on.
Yeah, that's really good advice. You aren't going to know all of the answers. In every single AWS certification exam that I've taken, I have flagged tons of questions of like, if I had an infinite amount of time, I'd go back to that one and reread it and double check, or what are they meaning by this? It's okay, it's okay. You can do it still, you can be just fine. So, all right, so you've understood, you've eliminated a number of them. At that point, maybe you have a few left, a couple left. Ideally, you only have one left, and you're like, oh, this is the answer. But you want to evaluate the ones that are left. So you want to say, oh, well, if this is going to help, is it going to help a lot or is it going to help a little? You want to pick the one that helps a lot. It's the best answer that fits that particular situation. So if it says, how would you reduce costs? And one of the options is turn off one unneeded instance. Okay, well that saves you 1 unit of stuff. But if the other option is get rid of all of your instances because you only need a static page that's hosted in S3 or something like that, maybe something at a higher level like that, you can say, oh, all of the instances, that's way better than one of the instances. I'm going to save more money. It's a better response. So you evaluate them on those in those dimensions, and you choose the right number. Like I mentioned earlier, you might have to choose 2 of the correct options. Or in some exams I think I've seen choose 4 of 8, but I don't think those are there anymore, right?
In Cloud Practitioner, you will never have more than two keys.
There you go. Yeah. Excellent. Good to know. And then validate. Just double check your answers. Before you move on, especially when it's in your head, just reread the question, reread your response and say, does this match this? Yes. Okay, next question.
And also, Mattias, I would say, it's great advice to look for the kicker question. Now, in the Cloud Practitioner, the questions are not very long. So, it's not too hard to find that kicker. But in the other exams that are beyond the foundational, it can be more of a challenge to isolate exactly what you're trying to look at. And another thing to consider is if you see a word in uppercase in that kicker question, that is a word that is differentiating 2 responses that might otherwise be correct, and exactly to what you're saying of finding the most cost effective. Right. So look for if there's an uppercase word in the kicker question or the challenge question, pay special attention to that.
Excellent tip. All right. So that is, this strategy, by the way, is from one of the lessons that I've put together that has more strategies like this, but we're not going to get into those at the moment. At the moment, we're going to jump into questions. So I saw that our very kind host already noted in the chat that you can add your questions to the chat as we're going through. We don't have to save them all for the end. That's okay. But there's another thing that's going on here, and that is that we are going to present you with a question. We're going to show you with the question on the screen and give you a 1-minute countdown timer. And that 1-minute countdown timer is roughly equivalent to what you would have in the exam if you had enough time budget to go through all of the questions, or remember there are 65 questions, and then still have some time left over at the end to review the questions that you flagged for review. So if you finish earlier than 60 seconds, that's great, no big deal. Just you answer and move on. If you need more time than that, then this is an indication, especially in practice, that this is something that you're weaker on. And in the exam, you don't want to let one question take up too much of your time, because if you do that, you won't get to see the rest of the questions, and you can't pass the exam unless you see enough of the questions. So, all right, when you have your answer during this live stream, you should put your responses in the chat. This is to keep us all a bit honest, but it's actually a really strong learning technique. So what I mean is that when you are going through this, you're going to be thinking some things, but to have to commit to something and put it down forces you to be really honest and critical about what you would do in an actual exam circumstance as well. So don't just think that you know the answer and feel like it. Just write something down. It is totally fine if you don't know the answers, especially because this is a practice session, right? Like, this is the whole point here. So, without further ado, I'm going to give us the 1 minute on the clock. It is going to start, I'm on the wrong screen. It is going to start now. Please answer the question and put it in the chat when you have it. All right, we're halfway through about, so hopefully you're trying to settle on something. This is a little bit more complicated of a question than some of the other ones, but I think you could do it. All right, 15 seconds left. You should be putting your answers in the chat. All right, I see some answers are starting to roll in. That's good. Time is up, so just get them in there. All right, so we want to walk through what's going on with this. So let's start by taking a look at the question itself. So a company's considering moving their critical applications and databases to the cloud. What are some of the benefits of moving to the cloud? And we need two of them, right? So if we take a look at the response options, we have an understanding now of this organization needs to improve their circumstance, but it's pretty general, right? So A, gain access to AWS support, a team of dedicated AWS experts to help with custom software development. No. When we're going through now this elimination here, that is not correct. We want to get rid of that one because AWS support doesn't assist with code development. They're not debugging custom software. They're not doing system administration tasks. That's not the way that works. So we should eliminate that one and then take a look at the next one. So what about answer B? The operate production workloads that are more highly available, fault tolerant, and scalable. I mean, that seems pretty reasonable. You have availability zones that can help you deal with fault tolerance and higher availability. You can scale out automatically with lots of the different services. This is really good stuff. So I think so, but we're in the elimination phase right now. So I'm going to put a question mark. Because maybe we'll come across something even better, right? The next one is C, so provision exactly the right type and size of computing resources you need. Well, yeah, I mean, that is also one of the advantages that I've heard so much about cloud computing, that you don't need to have it running when you don't need it. You can get exactly the right type and size for when you need that. So I'm going to, again, put a question mark there. And then this next one, shift the responsibility of security to AWS. Well, shifting the responsibility of security. I mean, I know there's this shared responsibility model of security, right? But is it shared? Well, this sounds kind of like it's shifting all the responsibility, but that's not what we want. But maybe it only means shifting some, so I'm going to put a question mark for now and then just take a look at the last option. Have direct control over servers? No. I mean, these are managed services. These are higher levels of abstraction. You could potentially get like a bare metal instance or something, but that's really not like this key advantage of the cloud, right? Especially, right? Even if you can do it in the cloud, it's not one of the advantages. So it's not answering the question that was asked in this question. So it conflicts with the kicker, and so we eliminate that one. Now, if we're looking at the ones that we have left, well, which ones are we dealing with? I would say that we should X out the shifting responsibility of security to AWS because it's really shared.
Exactly. So, we say AWS is responsible for security of the cloud, and the customer is responsible for the security in the cloud. In the cloud,
yes. So if we're still responsible for security in the cloud, that sounded like it was too grandiose of a shifting. So we get rid of that one, and the other two that we talked about, they're really good options.
Right, and these are content, this is a question that Pluralsight came up with, and I think it does a good job of illustrating what we're talking about here. And I like your technique. I like the technique of going in and eliminating the ones that you're sure are wrong. Occasionally you'll see a question, you just know the right answer.
Yeah.
But those are happy days, and enjoy that, but don't expect to find that every time you hit a question.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I see, based on the answers in the chat, that at least Milandvo Kambule, oh man, I'm so sorry about pronouncing your name. Congratulations, you got the right responses. So that was awesome. But to everyone else that put your responses in, don't feel bad about that. There's nothing wrong with the fact that you got the wrong response in this particular situation. That is really good. You need to, oh, I see someone added the response after we talked it through. I'm correct too. Yes. Now that you've seen the answer, you are also right. But the point is that when we jump into these things and are willing to try, we can learn from it. And learning is the whole point of what we're doing. So you've learned something about how you approach that question. You learned that you maybe missed that there were two options, and that a couple of people answered only one option at first, and then noticed, oh, maybe I do need to have some more. So these are the things that hopefully you're getting a little bit more comfortable with. So,
and then the questions, it will always tell you, like on your content here, you say choose two. If there's two keys you have to choose, it will always clearly tell you that.
And it won't even let you go to the next question on if you've chosen any one, then it says that you've partially answered, and it forces you to choose a second one. At least that's how it was before.
I believe that's correct, yeah.
So anyway, so don't stress about that, but take that information. Without further ado, I think that we can look at sort of the context of this question being that there are a number of different domains, and it's useful to have a sense for where this information sort of sits. Like, what is it that leads you to get the right answer on this? So you can take a look at some of the lessons that we have in our course for that. But also, flag and mark questions that you're unsure about is a tip that you've already mentioned, Andre, and I appreciate that. It's an important one, because if you're not sure, put your answers in. Don't just like leave it unanswered. Put something in, your best guess, but flag it and then move on.
Right.
You'll probably have a chance to come back to it, but even if you didn't, your first guess is going to be accepted. Even if it's flagged, it's fine.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's no benefit to leaving a question unanswered. So if you're running out of time on your exam, it's very important that you get some answers in for all of the questions and then go back and redo the ones you like. Now you just mentioned flagging an answer or flagging a response. You can also leave a comment for every question. And the comments can go to people like me. If you see a question and you don't like it for some reason, I will read those comments. Me or someone else on my team will see those. But there's another thing you can use that comment for. You can use it kind of as notes to yourself.
Oh.
I mean, if you've made this analysis and you've decided it's not A and E, you can write a comment to yourself and look at that comment later.
Interesting.
It's your field. You can use it however you want. It's their design to give us feedback. But if you want to use it for that purpose, we have no problem with that.
That's a good tip. I like that. That's a new one for me as well. So awesome. I love continuously learning more things too. So just a question to all of you, and we'll probably move on before I can see all the responses, but that's all right. Does this help you? Is this a useful way to break down questions? Are you seeing why it's the right response? If you are, then let us know and just sort of make notes of that. But I think that we should also move on to the next question so that we don't run out of time, because we want to get through more questions. So question number 2, we're going to have that one start when the next slide shows up, which should be right about now. Hopefully you understand the question and the responses by now, and you're trying to figure out, are there some you can eliminate? Are there some things you can do to settle on something? Feel free to settle anytime. You've got them, you can put them in right away. All right, we're down to, did our timer stop? Something, we had a little bit of a glitch. Okay, so now we're time up. Time is up. Hopefully you are putting your last responses in there in the chat. It's all right. If you hadn't had a chance yet, just realize that you need to be a little bit more focused on the time if you can, but let's jump in. So, companies migrating its SQL Server database to the cloud. That's an interesting key thing that we'll come to in a second here. Which services can host a SQL Server database? So, when we talk about the understanding of the question and the terms and everything, understanding that EC2 is the Elastic Container, Elastic Compute, Elastic
Compute Cloud.
EC2, my goodness, this has been a while. It's Elastic Compute Cloud. That's it, that's the cloud. Yeah, okay, goodness gracious. You don't actually need to remember that for the exam, thankfully, or maybe
No.
I wouldn't have passed that. But Document DB, you might know it manages MongoDB. RDS is the relational database service, and you can put databases on there and have AWS manage it for you. DynamoDB is a NoSQL database that is a different way of storing data. And Aurora is a type of RDS, but it's like the new SQL Server, sorry, not SQL Server, MySQL compatible format for or database engine.
Or Postgres.
Or PostgreSQL, that's right, I forgot about that. No, that is absolutely good. In fact, that's probably even preferable at this point. So, but you have a lot of options with these things. But if you understand, you read this term and you understand, okay, EC2, those are virtual machines, that you can run anything you want on that, but
Right.
you have to manage it. And the other things, as I talked about, there are ways that you can store data, but there are different types of storing it. So that term, SQL Server Database, is talking about the Microsoft SQL Server. Now, maybe the questions from AWS would have been a little more generous to put in the word Microsoft SQL Server to make it more clear, but a SQL Server database is not the same thing as a SQL-capable database. That capital S on server is an indication that it's the Microsoft one. And that actually means that when we go through the responses, we can start looking at, okay, well, can we do a SQL Server database on EC2? Well, yes, we can, because we can install anything we want on that. So we're not going to eliminate it. But what about B? Document DB is about MongoDB. That's not SQL Server. We have to eliminate that one. It doesn't fit. RDS, well, RDS does actually support SQL Server, also MariaDB and Oracle and PostgreSQL, and Aurora is a flavor of RDS that also supports MySQL and PostgreSQL, like you said, but
Right.
more powerfully in a better sort of scalable way. But that's a little beyond the level of this, right?
Sure.
So we would eliminate, though, DynamoDB because it's a NoSQL database. And Aurora, as we just talked about, it doesn't have it doesn't have SQL Server as the type of thing that you can use.
Right.
So after just eliminating things, we're actually left with just two options. Now, as we've talked about, RDS, you definitely can have AWS manage that SQL Server database for you, but you can also install it yourself on the virtual machine on EC2, and that is a totally reasonable response. So A and C are the correct responses, and I'm looking here, did we get any A and C's? I think people got a little tripped up. This was oh no, Lewis Saw did actually get A and C. Congratulations, and quickly too, I remember now. So everyone else, it's okay. It's really okay. This was a pretty tricky question because of that little detail, and I'm wanting you to pay attention to those little details. But let's take a look at what we've got for the areas. You can take a look at certain sort of aspects of where the cloud practitioner information gets broken down, and take a look at that. But at the very least, as a tip, you can eliminate most of the time a couple of the options. Most of the time, if you have a sense of them, you're just like, oh no, that doesn't work. So,
I mean, this question is a lot more difficult if you don't know what SQL Server is.
yes.
If you don't have that tidbit of knowledge, it's kind of hard to answer it. But with knowledge of what the services actually do, you can still get there. But even if you don't, you're right. You can eliminate the NoSQL options.
Yeah. And in particular, MongoDB is in the Document DB umbrella, and DynamoDB is Amazon's own flavor of really cloud-native NoSQL database, highly scalable.
Key value store.
Yeah. Key value store is probably a better way to describe it, but yeah, it's definitely where you're storing data. You can query and you can scan and you can filter and you can do a lot of stuff with DynamoDB, but it's not the same type of SQL database. It's a NoSQL. Someone commented, I noticed that every NoSQL service has DB in its name. I don't know if that's always the case. I'm not sure either, but if it helps you remember for the moment, there's nothing wrong with that, and you'll get more familiar with it as you keep going. Maybe you'll come across something that does have DB in the name and you're like, oh, no, this breaks it. But now it'll sort of stick in your mind even more clearly because you were faced with that directly. So
Yeah, it's interesting observation.
yeah, good call out. All right, well, I think that we should probably keep moving on to question number 3. And so that we have some more time to keep talking about more questions and stuff, let's get into it. 1 minute starts now. Halfway through, hopefully you have some understanding of this and are looking at eliminating options and stuff. "15 seconds left. Feel free to put your answers in anytime. All right, time is up, so let's take a look at what we've got. Well, companies using Trusted Advisor to ensure they're following AWS best practices. What real-time guidance does Trusted Advisor provide? Choose 3. So, like Andre mentioned, this is probably not an official, it's not of the format that you would see in the official questions. To be clear, all of these questions are questions that we made up, because we don't know the questions in the official exam. We don't want to know those ones and have them show up in this, because we want you to learn the material and be able to answer all the questions because you understand the material, because that's what will help you in your actual lives. So don't ever try to memorize our questions. Memorizing them is not a good strategy. It's actually going to confuse you and potentially get you tripped up if something winds up looking too similar later to something that you have seen.
Definitely, it's so much better to learn the material and then you can answer the questions. Yeah, it's a bad practice to try to memorize what the questions are.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is, I mean, you're right. It's not written exactly like AWS would write it, but it's still a great question to bring out what you're talking about. I'm excited to hear it.
Just while we're on the topic of anti-memorization for questions, I'll point out that sometimes when I write exam questions, practice exam questions, I write a number of them that are identical except for one word that changes which of the same options is the one that is correct, so that if you're memorizing and you're jumping to one of the options, you memorized the other one, didn't notice the one word because you weren't reading, you were just memorizing, and then you get it wrong, which shows you that you're falling into a trap of not being diligent about reading the question, and that's an important thing. So,
sure.
All right, let's jump into this. So, exposed access keys. If we have exposed access keys, is that going to be something that Trusted Advisor gives us? Well, it does actually check for those sorts of things, and it checks also for buckets permissions, but it doesn't check for services being down. That's not one of the things that we get from Trusted Advisor. We do get the lower utilization on instances. Those are things, if we've used Trusted Advisor, we'll have some sense of that. And what about upcoming user interface changes to the console? Yeah, no, that's not a Trusted Advisor thing either. So at this point, after just eliminating a couple of those things where Amazon services being down isn't a part of what Trusted Advisor does for us. That's the customized service health dashboard, I think, right? Like the customer.
Yeah, health dashboard, right?
Yeah, it's going to tell us about the services that AWS is running. But if we've eliminated 2 things and we're supposed to choose 3, it's I guess it's as easy as ABC in this question.
Sometimes it is.
It's not always easy though, and that's okay. I see a lot of people have answered a lot of these individual answers. I don't see at the moment anyone that's got all 3 of them, but again, that's all right.
And Mattias, you were mentioning earlier the difference between multiple choice and multiple response,
yeah,
and how this one has choose 3, and on the CLF exam you'll only see a maximum of 2. There's always 3 distractors on on all exams, so there will always be exactly 3 distractors to help you understand.
That's another good tip. Always 3 things that are wrong.
Always 2 distractors. Yeah.
Cool. All right, and you need to know about Trusted Advisor, obviously. But my recommendation is really that you should eliminate. Focus on the elimination, because if you can see what it does not do, the rest of the things, even if you haven't memorized all of them, you'll have a sense for things, and it's like, oh no, that's wrong. Oh, that's not either. Oh look, I've gotten to the answer just through the elimination. So, all right, I think we should jump into question 4, and the time starts now. Halfway through, how are you feeling? Oh, I see a response coming in. Excellent. All right, time is up, and we've had a number of people respond with C, B, and D. I think the only one that we haven't seen is A so far, but we'll see as we jump in to the breakdown. So, if you're looking for understanding this question, the key things that should jump out are developer support and a support case. So, as a developer support plan, that's like a lower tier. This isn't a production system. This is your building, you're developing some stuff, trying some stuff out. This isn't the operations team with a site that's down that needs high response and all that immediate stuff. This is, I hit some issues, I need to try and figure them out as a developer. So you don't get a support concierge team and phone support. That's not one of the options. However, if you are a developer support, you are able to open some technical support cases via email. So that is actually one of the things that you can do. But you don't have a technical account manager. Those are for larger accounts, and it's not a developer support plan. So you can't call them. And you don't have chat. That's not one of the things that you get from the developer support plan. So if you understand this, then you have a sense for how sort of AWS structures some of that support system, which is important when you're jumping into using the cloud. This is like a foundational thing. A lot of technical people get this one wrong because they don't know what's available to them in their different circumstances. And sometimes they wind up tripping over that, thinking that they are in a situation or getting themselves into a situation where something doesn't warrant developer support plan. They really should have been on a higher tier of support so that they can get a much faster turnaround.
Right. Some companies, the company only uses enterprise support.
Yeah.
And so someone might not have exposure to exactly what the limitations are of the lower cost support plans. So yeah, it's a good thing to be testing on.
Yeah, so the answer was B, and there were a number of people that got the right answer there. Congratulations. I think Jeffrey Batista was in that section, and Louis Saw, and RSS Tarkar, Simon Mellor, Giorgio. Okay, anyway, we got a lot of great responses on that, but let's take a look. So there are a few different things about the support plans. You were mentioning at some point that there are maybe some additional support plans that have been added.
So yeah, you list enterprise support. A while ago, we also added enterprise on-ramp,
okay,
which is similar but has a different pricing structure than enterprise support.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I will call out that even though that wasn't, or that thing has changed,
right,
because it wasn't listed as one of the options, it means it's all right. It even if that were a better option for this particular question, if it's not one of the given options, you can't choose it. You have to choose the best of the options that you are given. And so sometimes people get caught in that trap as well.
Right.
When it asks which is the best way to do such and such, it doesn't mean just in general, if you were going to go and do the best thing that you knew how to do in your job, it's the best of the options that you're presented with, of the response options, and that's actually quite realistic from a real world circumstance, because there are lots of times when you don't have access to a particular AWS service because it needs to go through some certification, and you're needing to deal with, I don't know, HIPAA compliance or PCI, or I don't know, whatever the situation might be. Although, to be honest, those services are all getting those different compliances very quickly, but maybe there's some new service especially that hasn't gotten it, right? So.
Right, so if you're going to buy fruit off a fruit stand, you want to buy a piece of fruit that actually is sold there.
Yeah.
You can't buy something that's not on the stand.
That's a good analogy.
It's the same thing here.
Yeah. Well, what's your favorite fruit of blueberries, oranges, strawberries, and bananas?
Right.
You're like, pineapples. I'm a pineapple. No, we don't sell those. Yeah, that's a great analogy. Love it. All right, so there's some, if you go to the documentation, you can see that there's good information about how the support plans are structured, and you can follow up on that. If you didn't get the right answer, that's okay. Actually, I saw also that somebody answered 2 responses for this single response question. So I think we're over training you to recognize the choose 2. That's okay. This is the practice. That's the reason for this. So.
And by the same token, as you mentioned earlier about having to put in the number of responses, if you put in a second response, it would you would see that it unchecked the first response you put in.
Right. It's a radio button for the single select, right? And check
right.
boxes for the multi-selects.
That's correct.
Right. All right. So that's excellent. So it's even harder to get it right here because the tool doesn't support that. Our chat system doesn't know what you're doing. So, all right. Next question. Question number 5. I think this might be our last question here in terms of time. Our time starts now. Get your answers in whenever you want. It's all good. Oh, I see them coming in. Good. The earlier you answer the questions in the exam, the more time you save for review at the end. So bank the time if you have it. It's all good. All right, the time on our timer is up, so let's jump in. A huge department store sells products online and in person. Most of their customers use credit cards instead of cash when making purchases. For security purposes, the credit card data must be encrypted at rest. Which services allow the department store to generate and store the encryption key used to secure the credit card numbers? So there was a lot of information there, but not all of it was necessarily relevant right off the bat. So what are some of the key things? In particular, I'd say a key thing is generate and store the encryption key. That is like, you'd better be answering that, because if it's just about storage, that's not going to do it for you, right? So if we're looking at that then, what about A? Well, Macy is about looking at your data in S3 and looking for private information, personally identifiable information, driver's license numbers, passport numbers, credit card numbers, all sorts of different things that shouldn't always be available. And because they're not always things that you may see. Not everyone should be able to see those things, Macy, right? So Macy is not the thing that generates or stores encryption keys. So we just, we knock it out. But what about KMS, the key management service? That is what KMS does. It does generate and store encryption keys and manages that sort of stuff. So let's move on and take a look at some of the other options there. So, so what about C, Secrets Manager? Well, you can manage and retrieve secrets, passwords, or keys, but is that what it's getting at? Generate and store the encryption key? Well, you could store a key in Secrets Manager. Let's not eliminate it. Let's go to D. Cloud HSM is a hardware security module, that's the HSM, and it is used to generate and store encryption keys in like a physical box, because sometimes there are compliance reasons why you can't use software to generate those things. You need it in a hardware. So this is really looking like something, yeah.
And yeah, Cloud HSM also a lot of companies are sensitive to not being able to share that with another company. They
Right.
need their own.
Yeah. So to have that like not multi-tenant, it's a single
Exactly.
tenant
Exactly.
device.
Yeah.
So that is also why there can be a much higher cost for Cloud HSM. Well, not can. There is a much higher cost for Cloud
Sure.
HSM than there is for KMS.
Right.
But they both do that thing. But if we jump down to E for just a second, I want to eliminate that one because IAM, Identity and Access Management, it's about controlling access to the services and resources, but not about the encryption keys for your data.
Right.
So that's really not the right one. So now then, if we go back to the other options that we had available here, KMS and Cloud HSM, they're really strongly about generating and storing the encryption key. So even though you could store an encryption key in Secrets Manager, it's not really about generating them, and it's not really designed for storing them. It's a worse answer. So I would just get rid of that one, and I would say B and D. And we got a lot of B and Ds. So congratulations to all of the correct respondents there. We got Gazim Hassani, Aris Starkar again, Louis Saw, and Giorgio Piccini. All right.
Sounds like some rock stars there.
Yeah,
and
great stuff.
This is interesting to me. So the word generate, essentially eliminates option C. So,
Okay.
and the word encryption key essentially eliminates option E. If those words were different, both of those could conceivably be answers.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's one word that eliminates a specific distractor.
Right. And yeah, so it's so important to pay attention to the details.
Yeah.
There are a few different lessons that you can take a look at for this, but fundamentally, the key takeaway is that you need to be really paying attention to those details, and you need to. Someone admits that they didn't get it right. I shouted them out, but. You know what? Good on you. I'm sure you're learning from this, and that is excellent. And you're clearly paying attention and getting something out of this. I like that. But yes, you were right with B for a couple of people that didn't get the full answer right, and that's excellent. Paying attention to those little details, understanding how to approach this thing so that you can jump in, and I would suggest, again, go through that process. Just figure out how you can be more methodical about it, because it keeps you in these guardrails and sort of avoids falling into traps. So we have a few minutes here for some Q&A. If you have any questions, I definitely have had a really great time talking these things through with you. I really appreciate you joining me here.
Oh, this is fantastic, Mattias. And if there's no questions coming in yet, one thing I'd also add is, if English is not your primary language, your first language,
good tip.
and if you're taking the exam in English and you can take it in other languages, you can always go to the vendor, either Pearson VUE or PSI, and request an extra 30 minutes on the clock. And they will give you that extra time for you to take the exam, since it might take you a little longer to read the questions. And that applies to not only this exam, but all the other AWS certification exams.
It's such a good tip, actually. But a key point is that you have to do this before you book your exam.
100%.
If you have already booked your exam, you're going to have to. It doesn't work. You need to do it in advance so that when it gets booked, the booking has that key metadata on it. So definitely take advantage of that. If English is not your first language, it is totally fair. There's nothing wrong with that. It's made for this purpose. Because the point is not to be punishing or grueling. The point is to determine whether you know what you're talking about, to demonstrate your ability so that AWS can say, yeah, hey, great job. We think you qualify for this. And then you've earned it. That stepping stone's locked in. You can keep building on that, both in your professional career and also in your certifications, is just learning your way forward. So
we strive for the exams to be not only accurate but fair. So someone in any part of the country, any part of the world, should have the same chance of passing the exam, regardless of that.
Yeah, being more accessible is actually, I think, one of the themes of AWS. So it's important to me as well. I value that it is something that is valued from the AWS certification side of things, to not be gatekeeping. We want people to be included in this ecosystem.
Absolutely. We want people from all over the world, all walks of life, to have equal opportunity for it.
Yeah. Do you have any other things that you wanted to call out? Tips that we forgot about, or?
One thing I would say is, when you're taking a certification exam, understand that if you did not pass, that doesn't necessarily mean you failed in this process. There are exams that I did not pass the first time I took it. If I would have stopped there in my journey, that would have been a failure. But if I keep going, now that I've taken the exam, and even if I didn't pass, I've learned the areas that I was weak on, the areas I needed to study more. I go back, I study, I take the exam, and I succeed. So that is, failing the exam is not a failure. It's, to me, success deferred. As long as you're willing to keep going. So just really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Every experience that we have, we can learn from it. If we have that mindset, we keep moving forward. That's really the only way to succeed in technology, is to continue learning our way forward. And so I appreciate that you called that out. And it also actually gave some people a chance to ask their questions. So now we do have some questions to answer as well.
Perfect.
One of them was about AWS Skill Builder. Is that enough for passing the Cloud Practitioner exam? I'm not sure that I would say that some particular content is enough, but do you have a comment on that?
I personally like to, when I was studying for exams, I like to look at a couple different sources. Obviously, I work for AWS, and we provide Skill Builder, and I think it's a fantastic tool, including CloudQuest as part of Skill Builder. But what I recommend is definitely do hands-on as well. There's the free tier account. There's training partners like Pluralsight. Use whatever makes you comfortable in getting ready for the exam. But as much as you can do hands-on, that's always the best. If you have a job where you can get exposure to AWS, I know when I was first learning this, I had a job where some of the groups used AWS and some didn't, and I would raise my hand. I would try to get involved with any project that was using it. And then, hobbyists, I would do that sort of thing in the background. Julius Caesar said, we learn best by doing, and Julius Caesar did not have any AWS certifications, but the knowledge is still good today.
I love it. Awesome. Another question was about the question where we had, sorry, let me just read the question. Could you explain once more why Aurora was the wrong answer to the question about SQL? So Aurora is a type of RDS that can support certain database engines.
Right.
In particular, it supports PostgreSQL and MySQL. Those are the two database engines that it supports. And it works in a very different way than just the normal RDS, which was AWS will find a virtual machine, we'll install the software, we'll update the software, we'll have the hard drives there, we'll update the hard drives, and all of the back up the drives. And it would that model is the sort of the older RDS, but Aurora is rethinking of the way that works. And so the data layer, the storage layer, is completely separated from the compute layer. It's multi-availability zone, and it's like it manages to synchronize data very quickly all over the place. And because of all of those things that it's dealing with, it needs to work against an open source engine that Amazon can make sure is functional for what they're doing there. They need to make some tweaks and improvements potentially to the open source engine, which I believe they've given back in, I don't know. I don't know the details, but they're completely compatible with the open source engines.
Right. Aurora is a higher performance, certainly back-end storage. And
Right.
so you simply, to answer this one, you simply got to know that Aurora does not support SQL Server.
Yeah.
And as we said earlier, you've got to know SQL Server is a specific database product. If you don't read that capital S on server in this example, that might not make sense to you.
Yeah. So yeah, in particular, SQL Server, it means Microsoft SQL Server. It doesn't just mean a database server that happens to understand SQL.
Right.
Because Aurora is a database server that understands SQL of the format of either PostgreSQL or MySQL.
Right.
So yeah. The last question that we've had, and I think the last question we have time for, is explaining a little bit more about the Cloud HSM. So I'd be happy to do that as well. So the Cloud HSM is the hardware security module. Basically, Amazon has data centers, and in those data centers, they've got big racks full of stuff. Some of those racks are hard drives. Some of those racks are processors, computers, and some of those racks are these cloud HSMs, the hardware HSM, hardware security module. And those things sit over there for somebody to say, I'm going to pay the price to get one of those without having to go and buy one and put it in my own data center and hook it up to networking and have all of the extra things that you have to manage when you buy your own. You get the benefit of that, but it's a piece of hardware that's different hardware than all the other ones. KMS is software that Amazon runs in those data centers, but they run them on the EC2 instances. So like a KMS, I believe so anyway. This is my mental model of how it works, but it's been functional so far. But that the AWS services, the higher order services, are built on the lower level services like EC2. Actually, I was talking with someone from AWS a while back, and they were saying that bootstrapping a region or an availability zone is rough because, well, in particular a region, because all of the services that they're using are not there yet. So they have to like cross-region connect to identity and access management to be able to then bootstrap the stuff that's in the, anyway, it goes on and on. So.
But yeah, so and it's a good point you've made. So the hardware, or the HSM, hardware security module, is being called from KMS.
Right,
so
fair point.
KMS can make the keys on its own, or it can go to an external source to get the keys. And you usually wouldn't use an HSM unless you're required to do so, unless you've got some governance that is required you to do that.
Absolutely right. Those are excellent points as well. Yeah. All right, well, I think that's all the time we have today, but this was a really fun session. I really appreciate you joining me.
Oh, I enjoyed it, Mattias.
Yeah, I hope that you all join us for our next streams when they come up. And to those people who are telling us at the beginning of the stream that you were taking your exam next week or really soon, or maybe you didn't tell us and it's coming up soon, I hope that this has been helpful to you. And I hope that you feel a little more confident about how you can now close this down and get that certification. And remember, even if you don't get it, you're learning and you're succeeding by moving forward. So don't feel bad about that.
Awesome.
I really appreciate you spending the time with us. I really appreciate you joining us on stream. Thank you all. And thank you also to our awesome people who've been working behind the scenes to make this happen. All right, that's all from us. Keep being awesome, Cloud Gurus.